Hello, and welcome to Everyday English Learning, the channel where you improve your English step by step through simple and powerful stories. Today, I will tell you a long, motivational story that will not only inspire your life, but also help you practice English listening and speaking. So sit back, relax, and let the story guide you. Arun was a quiet boy from a small town where mornings smelled like fresh tea and dusty roads, and where dreams were often smaller than the sky, but bigger than the kitchen table. His family lived in a one-room house with a tin roof that sang loudly when it rained, and he shared a wooden study desk with his younger sister Mira, who always smiled even when the power went out and the room turned dark. Their mother repaired clothes for neighbors, and their father worked long hours in a workshop fixing old machines. So money was tight, food was simple, and school felt like a long mountain walk that began before sunrise. Yet the mountain taught Arun one precious lesson. If you keep walking, the hill will stop feeling like a hill. At school, he sat in the back row because his shoes were worn out and his English was weak, and he felt small when the teacher asked questions he could not answer. So he kept his eyes on the floor and his hands folded. One day, the teacher read a story about a seed growing into a strong tree, and Arun felt something move inside his chest, like a tiny bird stretching its wings for the first time. If a seed can grow in hard soil, he thought, maybe I can grow too. That afternoon, he visited the library, a small room with dusty shelves and patient books, and he picked a thin English book with big letters and simple sentences. He read slowly, word by word, sentence by sentence, stopping to breathe when his tongue felt heavy. And every time a word was difficult, he whispered to himself, I can try again. When he reached home, the power was out, the kerosene lamp smelled strong, and his mother's fingers moved quickly through thread and cloth. Yet she still looked up and said, Study with a calm heart, son. He wrote the new words on a piece of paper. Hope, patient, repeat, courage, and placed it under his pillow as if he were planting a seed inside the night. The next morning, he woke early, repeated the words, and felt a small strength in his voice. At school, some boys laughed at his accent, but Arun held his chest steady, like a boat in gentle waves. He began helping Mira with her reading, and each time he explained a simple sentence to her, he understood it better himself. On Sundays, he cleaned tables at a tea stall to earn a few coins, and while wiping the cups, he practiced English in his mind. I will learn, I will grow, I will not stop. The tea stall owner noticed and said kindly, Practice makes power. That line became a rhythm for Arun's steps. When exams came, he did not top the class, but he did something better. He improved honestly. The teacher called his name and said, You are moving forward, and those words felt like warm sunlight on cold skin. From then on, Arun kept a small notebook called Tiny Wins, where he wrote every little progress. Learned 10 verbs today, spoke 1 sentence to a stranger, read 3 pages without stopping. Every page reminded him that small steps become long roads. Once, the roof leaked during the monsoon, and the family gathered under one dry corner. But Arun held his book above the water and continued reading. He told himself that storms test the roots and make trees hold the earth tighter. He started to understand that success is not a sudden jump. It is careful walking on a rough path. It is choosing to study when you are tired. It is choosing kind words when people are unkind. It is showing up when no one claps. At the end of the year, he stood by the school gate and promised the sky, "I will learn English. I will use it to lift my life, and I will help others lift theirs." The seed had cracked open. The first tiny green had appeared. And even if the world did not see it yet, Arun could feel it, growing quietly in the soil of his heart. Arun learned that big dreams can frighten the mind, so he turned his big dream into small daily promises. Read for 20 minutes, speak for 2 minutes, write 5 sentences, review 10 words, sleep on time, wake on time, and start again. He called this his 5-brick wall, because every day he placed 5 small bricks to build the strong house of his future. Each morning he walked to school, repeating simple lines. "Today, I will try. I do not need to be perfect. I only need to improve." He pinned a paper on the wall that said, "Simple English, strong life." And he smiled whenever his eyes touched those words. He found a cheap second-hand dictionary and kept it like a friend. And whenever a new word shook his confidence, he opened the book and said, "Teach me." He began reading simple stories aloud, not fast, not fancy, just clear, and he recorded his voice on an old phone. At first, he did not like the sound. It felt weak and narrow, but he did not fight it. Instead, he said, "This is my starting voice. My better voice is under construction." He practiced shadowing, listening to a slow audio sentence and repeating it with steady breath, one sentence at a time, like stepping stones across a river. When he stumbled, he did not fall into the water of fear. He simply tried the stone again. In class, he started asking small questions, and even if his grammar was not perfect, the teacher encouraged him, because courage is grammar for the heart. At home, he explained lessons to Mira, using simple words in warm examples, and he noticed that teaching others polished his own understanding like cloth on metal. He made English a part of daily life, naming objects in English, thinking in English while walking, thanking his mother in English sometimes just to practice kindness with new sounds. On difficult days, when the workshop salary was late and dinner was thin, he still did his 5 bricks. On rainy days, when the road was muddy and his feet were cold, he still did his 5 bricks. On festival days, when the house was bright and full of sweets, he still did his 5 bricks. His consistency became a quiet drum that kept the rhythm of his journey. After 3 months, he noticed a beautiful change. Sentences that once looked like fences now looked like doors. He wrote a short paragraph about his town and read it to the class. Some students listened, some whispered, but Arun kept his eyes on the words and finished strong. Later, the teacher wrote on his notebook, "Clear ideas, keep going," and those 2 short sentences felt like medals he could wear inside his shirt. He started a small study group under a banyan tree after school, where 3 friends joined him. Priya, who loved stories, Ravi, who struggled with verbs, and Samir, who feared speaking. Together, they read, repeated, laughed at mistakes, and then tried again. They made a rule: no one will laugh at effort, only at excuses. Slowly, the group became a mirror that showed each of them a better version of themselves. At the tea stall, the owner let Arun put a small cardboard sign that read, "Word of the Day," and customers smiled when they learned a new word with their tea. Arun felt shy, but proud, and he realized leadership begins when you help even one person take a small step. He still faced mockery from a few boys who said his accent was funny, but he discovered a secret. When you walk toward your mountain every day, the noise behind you becomes smaller than your footsteps. One evening, he wrote in his Tiny Wins notebook, "Today I spoke to my teacher for 2 minutes in English without fear," and then underlined the word "without," because that word tasted like freedom. He did not know it yet, but his small dreams, placed carefully like bricks, were building a bridge to a future that would carry not only him, but many others across the river of doubt. Months of steady effort began to show themselves in Arun's life, like sunlight slowly breaking through morning fog. One day, the English teacher announced a short speaking contest where each student had to stand in front of the class and tell a small story in English. And Arun felt his stomach tighten because public speaking was the mountain he had always avoided. For 2 nights, he practiced in front of the cracked mirror, repeating a simple story about a farmer who worked hard and never gave up. And every time his tongue tripped, he told himself, "Trip is not fall. Fall is not end." On the morning of the contest, his hands trembled like leaves in wind, but he carried his Tiny Wins notebook in his pocket as if it were a shield. When his turn came, he walked slowly to the front, looked at the dusty blackboard, and began in a soft voice, "This is a story of a farmer who had faith." The first few words shook, but as he continued, he remembered his practice. He remembered his promise, and his voice grew steady. Some students listened with curiosity, others with surprise. And when he finished the last line, there was a pause, and then light applause. And for the first time, Arun felt the sweet taste of victory that comes from facing fear. He did not win first prize, but he won something greater. He won respect for himself. The teacher said, "Your words were simple, but your courage was strong." And that sentence burned warmly in Arun's heart, like a small lamp that could not be blown out. From that day, he realized success is not always about being the best. It is about being better than yesterday. He returned home and shared the story with Mira, who clapped her small hands and said, "Anna, you spoke in English in front of everyone." And her joy doubled his confidence. The tea stall owner also heard about it and smiled, saying, "See, practice makes power, just like I told you." And Arun laughed for the first time without feeling shy about his English. The banyan tree group grew stronger too. Ravi dared to read aloud. Priya wrote a poem in English, and Samir introduced himself without fear. Together, they celebrated each other's progress, like festivals of the heart. Slowly, small successes began to shape Arun's belief that his dream was not far. It was just waiting for him at the end of many steps. Every evening, while writing in his notebook, he no longer wrote tiny wins, but growing wins, because he saw himself not as a seed anymore, but as a young plant learning to stand tall. One evening, When the monsoon clouds were heavy and thunder rolled, he wrote these words carefully. I spoke, I tried, I improved, I am moving forward. I will not stop. And he underlined the phrase, I will not stop, because that was the song his heart wanted to sing again and again. Arun did not know that this first small success was not just a spark. It was the flame that would keep burning through storms, guiding him toward bigger challenges, brighter victories, and deeper strength. Success often walks with failure as its shadow, and Arun learned this truth when he faced his first real fall. After his small victory in the classroom contest, he felt stronger, so he registered for an inter-school English competition where students from many towns gathered, and the topic was dreams and discipline. For weeks he prepared, standing by the lake, practicing lines, repeating them until the birds in the trees seemed to know his words. He dreamed of holding a small trophy and showing it proudly to his parents. But on the day of the competition, the hall was crowded. Bright lights shone on the stage, and the audience felt like a forest of eyes staring at him. When Arun began speaking, his first few lines came out clearly, but then he froze. His tongue forgot the next sentence. His eyes searched the paper nervously, and the silence grew heavy. Some students giggled. The judges looked down at their notes, and his confidence cracked like thin glass. He stumbled through the rest of the speech with broken sentences and hurried back to his seat, his face hot with shame. When the results were announced, his name was not even mentioned, and the walk back home that evening felt longer than any road he had ever walked. At the tea stall, he avoided eye contact. At home, he avoided speaking, and when Mira asked how it went, he only said softly, I lost, before closing his notebook. For days, he did not practice. He let the dictionary sit unopened, and he told himself, maybe I am not meant for this. Failure felt like a storm that had ripped the leaves from his young plant, leaving it bare. One night, he sat under the leaking roof, listening to rain, and felt as if every drop whispered, quit, quit, quit. But then he remembered the story of the seed that grew in hard soil, and he realized seeds do not quit. They wait, they rest, and then they try again. Slowly, he opened his Tiny Wins notebook and read old pages where he had written, I spoke for 2 minutes without fear. I helped Mira learn 10 words. I improved honestly. He understood that failure is not the opposite of progress. It is part of progress. The banyan tree group noticed his silence and came to his house, saying, You helped us. Now we will help you. And together they laughed about their own mistakes, reminding him that stumbling is not shame, it is training. The tea stall owner also said, A broken cup can be repaired, but an empty cup stays empty. Fill yourself again, boy. And those words sank deep. So Arun decided to return to his practice, slower but steadier, and he promised himself, I will face the stage again, and next time I will stand until the last word. The road had broken under his feet, but he learned that broken roads can still lead to mountains if the traveler keeps walking. Failure, he realized, is not the end of a story. It is the chapter that tests whether you are ready to keep writing. After tasting the bitterness of failure, Arun carried doubt like a heavy stone in his pocket. But life has a way of sending light when the night feels longest. One evening, while helping his father at the workshop, a visitor arrived, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Rajan, who had once taught English in the city and now returned to the town to live quietly. Mr. Rajan noticed Arun repeating English words while tightening a bolt and asked with a gentle smile, "Do you like learning this language, son?" Arun hesitated, but then nodded, and the old man's eyes brightened as he said, "Come to my house tomorrow evening. I will lend you some books." The next day, Arun walked to Mr. Rajan's small home filled with shelves of worn books, a dictionary as thick as a brick, and a warm lamp that seemed to welcome students. Mr. Rajan listened patiently as Arun explained his struggles, his broken speech on stage, and his dream of improving. Instead of laughing, Mr. Rajan placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "A failure is proof that you tried, and trying is the first sign of success. Let me guide you, but remember, the effort must be yours." From then on, Arun visited him 3 evenings each week. They read simple stories together, practiced speaking slowly, and built sentences like workers laying bricks. Mr. Rajan introduced a new rule called "Speak 1 minute every day." No matter the topic, Arun had to speak without stopping, even if he made mistakes, because flowing water cleans itself. At first, Arun stumbled badly, but Mr. Rajan clapped after every attempt, saying, "See, you lasted longer today. Tomorrow, you will last even longer." He also taught Arun how to break big goals into smaller targets. Learn 10 useful phrases, practice them in real life, then move to the next 10. Arun wrote them in his notebook and practiced at the tea stall with Mira, even while walking to school. Soon, phrases like, "How are you? Can you help me? I think so," became his friends. Mr. Rajan also spoke about confidence, reminding him that people respect honesty more than perfection. "When you speak," he said, "speak with heart, not just with grammar." These words freed Arun from the fear of mistakes. Under his mentor's guidance, Arun began to see English not as a wall, but as a bridge, and each new word was a plank laid across. One evening, Mr. Rajan told him a story of his own, how he once failed an important exam, cried for nights, but used that pain to build discipline, and eventually became a teacher who helped hundreds of students. "Your story," he told Arun, "is still being written. Do not close the book too early." Those words felt like water to Arun's thirsty soul. He returned home that night and told Mira, "I will not give up. I have someone to guide me now." And she clapped with joy. Even his parents noticed a new glow in his eyes, as if he carried a lamp inside. Arun knew the journey ahead was still long, but for the first time, he was not walking alone. He had found a mentor, a guide, and with that came new hope. The seed inside him was no longer just pushing through soil. It was beginning to see sunlight. With Mr. Rajan's guidance and his own discipline, Arun entered a season of steady growth, where each day felt like climbing a small step on a tall staircase. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, washed his face with cold water that sharpened his mind, and read aloud simple passages from the books his mentor gave him. At first, his voice cracked, his tongue tripped, and his memory failed. But he refused to stop because he had learned that practice is not about perfection. It is about persistence. After school, he spent an hour at the Banyan Tree Group, where he and his friends practiced dialogues like, "Can I help you?" or "Where are you going?" and laughed whenever mistakes slipped in, turning errors into lessons instead of shame. At the workshop, while helping his father, he whispered new vocabulary words to himself, turning grease-stained tools into teachers. Hammer, wrench, screw, bolt. Each word became part of his growing collection. At home, he helped Mira with her homework by making English games, such as drawing pictures and naming them, or speaking 5 new sentences before dinner. The tea stall owner allowed him to greet customers in English, and though his sentences were broken, the smiles he received gave him courage. Mr. Rajan introduced him to writing practice too, asking him to keep a journal of his daily life. Arun wrote short entries. "Today, I studied hard. I learned 5 words. I am tired, but I will try." And slowly, his handwriting and his thoughts grew clearer. After 3 months of this rhythm, something magical happened. His sentences began to flow without long pauses. His reading became smoother, and his listening sharper. During a school assembly, when the headmaster asked for a volunteer to read the morning news in English, Arun raised his hand before his fear could stop him, and when he read the lines in a steady voice, the crowd of students listened with surprise, because the boy from the back row had now found his voice. Teachers nodded, classmates clapped, and Arun felt the warmth of respect rising around him like morning sun. Later that day, he wrote in his notebook, "I spoke to all, and I stood tall," underlining the words, "stood tall," again and again. His parents, too, noticed the change. His father, tired after a long day at the workshop, looked at him with pride and said, "Son, you are building something bigger than machines." And his mother, with tears in her eyes, whispered, "Keep going, one step at a time." Arun realized that hard work does not show its results immediately. It is like water dripping on stone, shaping it slowly but surely. Now, when he looked at his old failures, he no longer felt shame. He felt gratitude, because those stumbles had pushed him to climb higher. His friends at the banyan tree also began improving under his influence, and soon other students asked if they could join, turning the small group into a circle of eager learners. Arun saw that his effort was not just changing him, it was lighting a path for others too. As he closed his journal that night, he smiled and wrote, "Hard work is slow, but it always pays. I will not stop climbing, because the top is waiting." Just when Arun felt his steps becoming firm, life tested him with the harsh voice of rejection. One afternoon, he saw a poster on the school notice board about an English essay competition sponsored by a local newspaper with the theme, "My Dream for My Country." And he worked day and night on his essay, pouring his heart into every line, checking each word in the dictionary, and polishing the sentences with Mr. Rajan's help until the paper shone with his effort. He dreamed that if he won, his name would appear in print, and his parents would proudly hold the newspaper like treasure. When the results were announced, Arun rushed to the teacher's desk, but his name was not on the list, not even among the honorable mentions. His chest tightened as if air had suddenly turned heavy, and he walked home with the sound of "not good enough" echoing in his ears. The next day, he overheard two classmates say, "Arun works hard, but still can't shine." And though they laughed lightly, their words cut deep like sharp stones. That night he sat with his journal, but could not write a single line, his pen frozen in his hand. He asked himself, why try if the world only says no? But then Mr. Rajan visited, and seeing his silence, told him gently, "Rejection is not a wall, it is a mirror. It shows you what to improve, not where to stop." He explained that even the best writers receive rejection letters. Even the strongest speakers forget lines, and that no is not the end of a journey, but the signboard pointing to the next attempt. Arun listened carefully, and though his heart still hurt, he decided to treat rejection as a teacher. He reread his essay, noticed places where sentences were too long, words too heavy, and he worked on simplifying them. He also asked Priya and Ravi from the Banyan Tree Group to give feedback, and their small suggestions helped him see his blind spots. Slowly, he learned that failure humbles you, but rejection strengthens you. A few weeks later, another chance came, an inter-district quiz in English, and this time, when he applied, he told himself, "I may win or lose, but I will not break." Though his team did not win first place, he answered two questions confidently, and for him, that was victory over fear. When people said no, he learned to whisper to himself, "Not yet, but soon." At home, he shared this lesson with Mira, telling her, "Saying no to you is not the end. It is the world testing if you are ready to fight for your yes." And she repeated those words back to him with a smile. From then on, Arun treated every rejection as a stepping stone, sometimes sharp, sometimes painful, but always leading upward. He wrote in his journal, "Rejection is not my enemy, it is my trainer," and underlined the word trainer 3 times. The boy who once trembled at silence now learned to stand strong against the sound of no, knowing that one day all the little rejections would add up to a powerful yes. Life often saves its most powerful lessons for the moments when a person is tired of walking, and Arun reached such a point one summer afternoon. The heat was sharp, the roads were dusty, and after weeks of study, practice, and small disappointments, he felt his energy sinking like the setting sun. While walking past the lake, he sat on a stone and whispered, "Why does the road feel endless? Why do I keep working if results come so slowly?" As he sat there, he noticed a fisherman throwing his net again and again into the water, each time pulling it back almost empty. Yet without complaint, he threw it once more, and after many tries, the net finally came up heavy with fish. Something struck Arun in that simple scene. Success was not one throw, it was many throws. The next day, he shared this thought with Mr. Rajan, who smiled and said, "Yes, Arun, persistence is power. People see the fish, but forget the empty nets that came before. Remember, every attempt counts." These words became a turning point for Arun. He stopped judging his progress by trophies or prizes and started measuring it by effort and consistency. In school, when asked to give a small introduction in front of guests, he stood confidently and spoke slowly, focusing on clarity, not perfection. And when he finished, One guest said warmly, "This boy will go far." It was not applause that mattered most to Arun, but the realization that steady effort builds unseen strength. He began writing a new section in his journal called Empty Nets, where he recorded all his failures, rejections, and mistakes, not to feel shame, but to remind himself that every empty net is part of the journey to a full one. His friends, under the banyan tree, adopted the same practice, and soon the group's motto became, "Throw the net again." Even Mira began using the phrase whenever she failed in math problems, smiling as she said, "One more throw, Anna." Arun noticed that this simple lesson not only changed his learning, but also his way of living. He faced challenges in schoolwork, family struggles, or even health issues with the same attitude of persistence. Slowly, his fear of failure melted, replaced by a calm strength that kept him moving. One evening, he wrote in his journal, "The world cannot stop a person who keeps throwing the net," and he underlined it boldly, knowing these words would guide him forever. The turning point had come, not with a trophy, not with a medal, but with the quiet wisdom that effort repeated with patience is the true engine of success. As Arun's confidence grew, he realized that true strength is not only about lifting yourself, but also about lifting others along the way. One afternoon, when he arrived at school, he noticed a younger boy named Kieran sitting alone behind the classroom, struggling to read a simple English passage, tears filling his eyes as older boys teased him. Arun remembered his own early days of shame and fear, and instead of walking past, he sat beside Kieran, took the book gently, and said, "Don't worry, I was just like you once. Let's read together." Slowly, he guided the boy through each word, encouraging him with small smiles and patient pauses, and, for the first time, Kieran finished the page without crying. That evening, Arun wrote in his journal, "Helping others helps me too," and he felt a new light inside his chest. Soon, his small study group under the banyan tree grew even larger, with younger students joining, and Arun naturally became their guide, explaining grammar, teaching pronunciation, and telling them motivational stories that made them believe improvement was possible. Instead of feeling burdened, he felt energized, because teaching forced him to simplify his own knowledge and polish his own skills. Mr. Rajan encouraged him, saying, "A candle loses nothing by lighting another candle." And those words stayed in Arun's heart like a mantra. He began creating small word lists and sharing them at the tea stall, where customers now waited for his word of the day before sipping tea. His mother noticed the respect he was receiving and told him, "Son, when you give knowledge, you receive dignity." And his father nodded proudly. Even Mira benefited, because her English improved quickly under Arun's patient guidance, and she often told her classmates, "My brother is my best teacher." Arun learned that by lifting others, he was also climbing higher himself. His speaking became clearer, his teaching more confident, and his purpose stronger. He no longer studied only for personal success, but also for the joy of seeing others grow. Rejection and failure no longer frightened him, because he had discovered a new source of power, service. As he wrote in his journal one night, "When we help one person rise, we rise twice, And he realized that the journey of learning English was no longer just his story. It was becoming a movement, a small ripple spreading through his school, his town, and soon, perhaps beyond. Slowly, Arun's quiet efforts began to shine in ways he had never imagined, and the world that once ignored him started to notice his steady light. During the annual school function, the headmaster announced that a student would deliver the welcome speech in English before all the guests, teachers, and parents, and, to Arun's surprise, his name was called. His heart pounded, but instead of fear, he felt a calm strength built from months of practice, empty nets, and small victories. He stood on the stage in his simple uniform, looked at the large crowd, and began with the words, "Good evening, respected teachers and dear friends," his voice clear and steady. As he continued, his sentences flowed naturally, not perfect, but full of confidence, and the hall grew silent, listening carefully. When he ended with, "Thank you for giving me this chance," the applause was loud and long, and Arun felt as though every clap was washing away the years of doubt and mockery. After the function, parents shook his hand, teachers praised his courage, and younger students looked at him with admiration. Even the classmates who once teased him now whispered, "Arun has changed," with a mix of respect and surprise. The local newspaper wrote a short note about the event, mentioning a young student who inspired the audience with his simple but powerful English speech. And when his father read it aloud at the tea stall, pride filled his tired eyes. His mother placed the clipping carefully inside her old trunk, calling it our family's treasure. Mr. Rajan told him, "Recognition is not the goal, but it is proof that the world has started to hear your voice." And Arun understood that this was not the end, but a milestone on his long road. The Banyan Tree Group celebrated too, bringing sweets and clapping for their leader, who reminded them, "If I can stand on that stage, you can too." Arun realized recognition was not about trophies or headlines, but about trust. The trust of teachers who gave him responsibility, the trust of friends who followed his guidance, the trust of his family who now believed more deeply in his dream. That night, in his journal, he wrote, "Recognition is a mirror, but effort is the face. Without effort, the mirror shows nothing." And he smiled, knowing that the boy who once sat in the back row, hiding his worn shoes, was now walking boldly toward the front, not to show off, but to inspire. The world had begun to notice him, but more importantly, he had begun to notice his own strength. As recognition grew, so did the size of Arun's challenges, and life soon placed before him the biggest test he had ever faced. One morning, the district education board announced a grand English oratory contest, where the best students from many schools would compete on stage in front of hundreds, with judges from the city and even a live radio broadcast. When his school nominated him, Arun's heart raced. This was the mountain he had been climbing toward for years, but it was also the storm that could sweep him away. For weeks, he prepared tirelessly under Mr. Rajan's guidance, shaping his speech titled, "The Power of Never Giving Up." He practiced under the banyan tree, in front of his friends, at the tea stall, even by the lake where he once watched the fisherman throw his net. Yet, as the contest day drew near, fear crept back, whispering, "What if you forget again? What if you fail before the whole town?" On the night before the event, he could not sleep, so he opened his journal and read his old entries: tiny wins, empty nets, growing wins, and tears filled his eyes as he realized how far he had come. He wrote one final line before closing it: "Tomorrow, I will speak not for trophies, but for every boy who ever felt small." The next morning, dressed in a clean shirt borrowed from his neighbor, he stepped onto the massive stage, lights shining on his face, the audience stretching wide before him. His hands trembled, but when he touched the paper in his pocket, he remembered the journey, his mother's encouragement, his father's silent pride, Mira's laughter, Mr. Rajan's lessons, the tea stall's word of the day, the banyan tree group's cheers, and suddenly he felt he was not standing alone, but carrying the strength of everyone who had walked with him. He began, "Good morning, respected judges, teachers, and my dear friends. Today, I want to tell you about the power of never giving up." His voice was steady, his sentences smooth, his passion strong. He told stories of failure and persistence, of rejection and hope, of empty nets and full nets, and as he spoke, silence fell across the hall. Not silence of boredom, but silence of deep listening. When he ended with the words, "If a seed can grow in hard soil, then every dream can rise in hard life. Never give up." The hall erupted in applause so loud it shook his heart. Judges smiled, teachers nodded, and even the stern head of the panel wiped his eyes. Arun stepped down from the stage with tears in his own eyes, not because he was certain of victory, but because he knew he had given his soul to his speech. When the results were announced, his name was called first, and the trophy was placed in his trembling hands. Yet, in that moment, it was not the shining medal that mattered most. It was the realization that the boy who once hid in the back row had faced his greatest test and emerged unbroken, carrying not just a trophy, but a truth. Courage, persistence, and faith are the real rewards. The day Arun held the trophy high was not the end of his story, but the opening of a new chapter, where his voice began to echo far beyond his small town. The local newspaper printed his picture with the headline, "Boy Who Never Gave Up Wins District Speech Contest." And when his father read it aloud at the tea stall, customers clapped, saying, "This boy is our pride." His mother placed the trophy beside the family's small prayer shelf, whispering thanks with moist eyes, and Mira danced around the house chanting, "My brother is a champion." Soon, schools from nearby villages invited him to share his journey, and Arun spoke not with arrogance, but with honesty, telling students about his failures, his rejections, his empty nets, and the power of persistence. His story touched many because he never pretended to be perfect. He spoke as someone who stumbled, fell, and kept rising. The banyan tree group grew larger, with dozens of students gathering to learn English and life lessons under the shade. And Arun reminded them, "Every one of you has a stage waiting. Keep practicing until the day it calls your name." Mr. Rajan, proud and content, told him, "You are now the teacher I always hoped my students would become." And those words became Arun's greatest reward. As years passed, Arun's efforts carried him to college in the city, where he continued to learn and teach, often sending letters home about his progress. His simple journal of tiny wins grew into a thick notebook of wisdom, filled with lines like, "Failure is a bruise, not a tattoo. Rejection trains strength," and "Helping others is the highest form of growth." Eventually, he began recording his speeches so others could listen, and his voice reached villages, towns, and even far cities, inspiring thousands of learners who once believed they were too small to dream. Wherever he went, he carried the same humble truth, that a boy who once hid his broken shoes in the back row could, through persistence and courage, become a guiding light for others. One evening, standing by the same lake where he once watched the fishermen, Arun whispered to himself, "The seed has become a tree, and the tree gives shade to many." And he smiled, knowing his journey was never about English alone, but about proving that growth is possible for anyone who refuses to give up. His story became a living lesson that with patience, effort, and hope, a single voice can rise from silence and inspire millions to believe in their own strength. Thank you for listening to this motivational story on Everyday English Learning. Remember, learning English is like Arun's journey. It takes patience, practice, and never giving up. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can continue improving your English every day. See you in the next lesson.